Are we
Okay,
good now?
we're good. YouTube's live.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for participating in our remote meeting for the 2022 AQMP Scientific, Technical, and Modeling Peer Review Advisory Group. I'd like to read the housekeeping remarks and then hand it over to Sangmi to go through the agenda. We'll do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with everyone's participation. We ask that everyone be patient as we navigate this together. We have two formats for participation, the Zoom web application as well as teleconference. Before we begin, I want to review some guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. These are very important, so I ask that you pay close attention. Please silence your other communication devices such as your cell or desk phone. This will ensure that we are not hearing any feedback or causing interruption during the meeting. During the meeting, all participants on Zoom except for South Coast AQMD staff will be placed on mute by the host. That means that you will not be able to mute or unmute your lines manually. After the staff presentation on each item, we will request for comments from the advisory group members and members of the public. For those on Zoom, if you'd like to make a public comment on the Zoom screen, please click on the raise hand button. This will signal to the host that you would like to provide public comment and you'll be added to the list. If you are using Zoom on your smartphone, please tap the raise hand button on the bottom of the screen. For those calling in using the phone line only, you can dial *9 on your keypad to signal that you would like to comment. Your name will be called when it's your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. Please note you can hang up or leave the Zoom meeting at any time. Please treat others with courtesy and civility and respect the public meeting process. Rules prohibiting the use of signs or posters remain in effect for video participation. Profanity, discriminatory comments, or obscene gestures is prohibited. Disorderly, unruly, or aggressive behavior that infringes upon the rights of others or disrupts the good working order of the meeting is also prohibited. Any violation of the above rules can result in your mic being mute, your video shut off, or you being dropped from the phone or Zoom meeting line. Of course, we don't expect any of that to happen. But thanks again for participating in this meeting. I think Sarah is tied up with another meeting right now, so I just wanted to, again, welcome everyone and introduce AQMD staff. We have a full agenda for today, so we ask that everyone be patient with us. Hope to accomplish this meeting in 2 hours, but we'll try to streamline it on our end, but make sure we have enough time to address everyone's comments and questions. Maybe we can go through staff. Sangmi, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Sangmi Lee, Program Supervisor in Air Quality Modeling and Emissions Inventory.
Eric?
Eric Brasky, I work for Sangmi in Regional Modeling.
Ray?
Ray Zhang, Air Quality Specialist, working in Emission Modeling.
Mark?
This is Mark Carreras. I'm Air Quality Specialist working on Regional Air Quality Modeling under Sangmi Lee.
And I think Scott Epstein is trying to join the panel. If somebody could move him over. I didn't introduce myself. So my name is Zorik Pirvesi. I'm Planning and Rules Manager, also with Planning Division. Scott, if you can introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Scott Epstein. I'm the Program Supervisor of the Air Quality Assessment Group.
Great, thank you. Anybody else, Sangmi?
I think that's it, but then we'd like to ask our STMPL advisory group members to introduce themselves briefly. So can we do that? Maybe with the order of the name just appeared on my screen. Would it be okay?
Yes, go ahead.
So Carol?
Hi, I'm Carol Bodenkamp from US EPA Region 9.
Gabrielle Fischer?
I'm Gabi Pista. I'm from the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado.
Pablo?
Hi, Pablo Saide from University of California in Los Angeles, Atmospheric and Oceanic Science Department and Institute of the Environment and Sustainability.
Ralph,
Yeah, this is Ralph Morris from Ramble.
Jeremy,
Jeremy Avis from the California Air Resources Board.
and Greg.
Hi, I'm Greg Osterman at Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Oh, great. Thanks for participating in our meeting. And if any other advisory group member, if you are attending this meeting, please raise your hand so we can move over to the panel. Otherwise, we can start the meeting. Jody, thank you very much for welcome and housekeeping and welcome and introduction. Appreciate your help here. And then as Jody mentioned, we have a full agenda today and we have 71 slides, but then as you all know, some of the slides do not need too much of time or some of them needs a little bit more time. So the staff will do our best to smoothly sail through the slides so we can have enough time for discussion. So with that, Paul, could you please put the slides up? And then we can put it as yes, slides presentation mode. So we have 4 items to present today. And the very first item is air quality trends in the basin and the design value. Next slide. So this is a presentation is to see how the changes in design value that to be used in the upcoming 2022 AQMP. This is ozone air quality trend that you have been, it's fairly familiar chart. So if you have attended our meetings, this type of chart you can see in any kind of public meetings. And then here we added the data point in 2020, even though they are preliminary, so that gives us some idea where we are heading to. So the red line is 1 hour ozone and blue line is 8 hour ozone. The 8 hour is 4th highest of a year, and then red one is the 2nd highest of a year. We chose those values specifically because of the significance in the making design value that determines attainment of a basin. So what you can see is starting from 1980, ozone air quality has been improved substantially. But if you focus in past 10 years or so, that has the period that used in 2016 AQMP and an upcoming AQMP, the signal is a bit mix and match, is sort of oscillating. So while there is a substantial improvement, this year-to-year variation we experience in the past decade is going to affect the current AQMP. And the federal air quality standard are marked here. The red one, the 1 hour standard attainment due is 2022. And then current AQMP is 70 ppb ozone AQMP for South Coast Air Basin. Attainment due is 2037. Next slide, please. This one is the same plot for Coachella Valley. So Coachella Valley is a separate air basin, even though it is under South Coast AQMD's jurisdiction. So since it is a separate air basin, it needs its own design value and it needs its own attainment deadline, and then its own attainment demonstration is required. So it's similar to South Coast Air Basin. Air quality has been improved substantially in past 4 decades. But in the past 10 years or so, it's been improved. But again, there is a year-to-year variation, as you can see here. One more comment I'd like to make here is since Coachella Valley is a separate air basin, it has its own non-attainment classification. So the 70 ppb ozone attainment due date is 2032, which is 5 years earlier than South Coast Air Basin. Next slide. So here is very basic sort of introduction how we calculate design value for modeling attainment demonstration. Typically, when you say a design value, that refers to 3-year time period. So each year you find out 4th highest and then average those for 3-year period. That is a typical 3-year design value. However, when it comes to modeling attainment demonstration, EPA recommends to use 5-year weighted design value to avoid abnormality caused by meteorology or emission. So 5-year weighted average, meaning average of three design values, so that toward the center of the 5-year period has a higher weighting than the wing, the edge of that 5-year period. For the current AQMP we are working on, so the data from 2015 through 2019 will be used. Next one, please. This graph is comparing the 5-year weighted design value that was used in the past AQMP versus that will be used in the current AQMP. So the x-axis include the abbreviation of all different stations, and then the blue bars indicate the 5-year weighted design value used in the last AQMP, and then red ones are new ones. It's a bit busy to see it, but what you can see is red bars, pretty much all the stations, is higher than blue bars, indicating the new design value to be used in the new AQMP is higher than previous AQMPs. Paul, click, please. So this arrow here indicates wetland. That's the design site of past AQMP, meaning that wetlands used to be the highest, used to have highest 8-hour ozone in the past AQMP. Next, click. The new one is crystalline. So the wetland last time it was about 103.7 ppb. The new one is approximately 110 ppb. So the difference of them is 5.6, about 6 ppb. So we now, typically in the past, when air quality always has improved with the time. So when you do new AQMP, your design value drops. But then this is very unique case that we do new AQMP, but we have to start with a higher design value, indicating it's a lot more challenging to demonstrate the attainment in the future year. Next, click. These two bars at the end, Indio and Palm Spring is Coachella Valley. So since that, as explained, that's a separate air basin, but still we're comparing this design value here in the same as South Coast Basin stations. So kind of a little different from South Coast Basin story, Coachella Valley air quality has been still improved in the past 5 years or so. So the new design value is lower. Next slide, please. This is a spatial variability, kind of reiterating the bar graph seen in the previous slide. So the left side and right side, as it was titled 2012 and then 2018 value, and then these color scales are the same. So what you can notice is in the right-hand side, it's moved toward more red color. That does not happen only one site, but it pretty much happened every site located in the foothills or inland area. The double circle indicate the design site, so indicating the change of the location. Next one, please. This one is simply seeing how the design site, so-called the site with the highest ozone value, changes from one location to another location. So in 2010 to 2014 period, it used to be Redlands. Now it is crestline, and then San Bernardino is fairly close to the crestline as well. So this is indicating there is no set pattern of ozone high site anymore. It's pretty much everywhere subject to similar, probably very similar, in general, similar emission patterns or chemistry patterns. So a little bit of a shifting or a little bit of a change can trigger the shifting around of this high design site. Next one. It's the same graph that's showing for Coachella Valley. Coachella Valley has been a little bit more steady, so Palm Spring remains as the design site. Next slide. We repeated the same analysis for 1 hour ozone, even though this current AQMP is going to be 8-hour attainment demonstration. So we just wanted to revisit where we are at with 1 hour case. So very similar, next click, please. Very similar to 8-hour pattern. First of all, the red bars are higher than blue bars. And in the past AQMP, the design site was Fontana as marked by this arrow. Next click. But the new design site is Glendora. That's Glendora shows 147 ppb, which 147 ppb, which is it's almost 10 ppb higher than previous design value 5 years ago. Next one, please. Same thing, spatial variability. As you saw in the 8-hour, it's generally all the stations are showing higher concentration, and also same as 8-hour, the design site has changed from Fontana to Glendora as marked by the double circle. Next one, please. Again, similar to 8-hour pattern, the design site in 2010 to 2014 period used to be Fontana. Now you can see some years Fontana has been substantially lower than any of these foothill or inland site. And then now in the new design value, the highest site, the sites with the highest concentrations are Upland and Glendora. Next slide, please. So this concludes the changes in design value. So what we presented today is 5-year weighted 8-hour ozone design value for the upcoming 2022 AQMP is higher than those used in previous AQMP by 5.6 ppb. In the 1-hour case, the difference is 8.3 ppb, which is higher, still higher than previous one. And the location of the design site changes, shifting around, indicating there is no set ozone pattern, just a little changes in probably transportation pattern or meteorology, or even shifting some anthropogenic emission can easily make one site, the new site can be can make new monitoring station as a design site. Coachella Valley 8-hour design value is lower than 2016 AQMP, so which is usually what we have seen in past many AQMPs. So that is a good news. This concludes the first agenda item about the ozone trend in the South Coast Air Basin. So we can take questions after each the presentation, after each agenda item. But even at the end of the all items presented, we can still come back and then have Q&A session as well. So if anybody has questions, we will be happy to answer. Otherwise, we can move on. But I can see this is relatively straightforward information. So if there is no question or comment, we're okay to move on.
Yeah, Sang-Mi, this is Ralph Morris. I just have a question on whether the district accounts for wildfires and exceptional events in their design values, or you just assume that they're not regulatory relevant.
So yeah, hi, Ralph. So the question is whether district accounts for wildfire case. The answer is yes. But then in South Coast Air Basin so far, the highest ozone episode, like 147 ppb, that's 1 hour value. That type of case was mostly driven by temperature and then anthropogenic emission. The days with wildfire, typically it's either late summer or early fall or late fall. So they do not really coincide with the top 10 days that are significant in the modeling attainment practice, or neither they have made the top 4 days that goes into design value. So for ozone design value perspective, we do consider the wildfire case. However, they have not made a regulatorily significant data point. But when it comes to PM 2.5, that's very different story. And then we do work on exceptional event case that, and then those data upon approval of EPA are excluded from design value calculation. Any more questions? I think then we can move on to next presentation. And again, if anybody has any more questions, you can send either by the raise your hands, or you can even put the Q&A through this Zoom, or we can speak at the end of the presentation as well, at the end of the, toward the end of the meeting as well. So then we will move on to item number 3, that is estimating biogenic emissions in the South Coast Air Basin by Dr. Eric Prosky.
Thanks, Sang-Mi. So I'm going to be presenting on our biogenic emissions inventory. Next slide, please. We use the model of emissions of gases and aerosols from nature to develop our biogenic inventory. So while Megan estimates species for greater than 30 SAPREC-07 species, the majority of those are isoprene and terpenes in terms of BVOCs. So I'm going to focus on those 2 species in the upcoming slides. Next slide. Here we're seeing a comparison of biogenic versus anthropogenic VOCs. This is the summertime average in the South Coast Air Basin. So a couple things to note here. The first is that BVOCs are on average about 70% of the AVOC total. But BVOCs are highly temperature sensitive. So on hot days, that difference is likely to shrink. The other thing to note is that BVOCs tend to be much more reactive than AVOCs. So they do play a very important role in terms of driving ozone formation in the basin. Next slide, please. This slide provides an overview of my presentation. I'm going to be discussing the various versions of Megan that have been employed in previous AQMPs as well as the current AQMP. I'm also going to discuss some updates that we've made to the leaf area index input using remote sensing products. Finally, I'm going to discuss a contract with Alex Gunther's group at UC Irvine, which used municipal tree inventories to improve the ecotype input in Megan. Next slide, please. The 2016 AQMP used Megan 2.1. We spent a lot of time testing Megan 3.0 and found that this was a significant update that introduced leaf area and emission factors in urban areas. A little over a year ago, Megan 3.1 was released. The major improvement in this version was the addition of the Berkeley-Dalhousie soil NOx processor. We found that the soil NOx processor significantly increased NOx emissions in the basin, biogenic NOx emissions in the basin. And in addition, we found that the emission factor map changed significantly, as we'll see in the next slide. Next, please. So this provides a nice overview of urban summertime average biogenic VOC emissions. So again, these are isoprene and terpene emissions. In 2016 AQMP with Megan 2.1, we saw very small amounts of isoprene and terpenes. This increased by greater than a factor of 10 in Megan 3.0 for isoprene. Megan 3.1 tamed the isoprene emissions somewhat, but the terpene emissions increased by over a factor of 3. So again, that's being driven by the changes in the emission factor map. Next slide. For the 2022 AQMP, we will be using Megan 3.1, and the default in Megan 3.1 is the 2008 leaf area index dataset for North America. It uses average values based on the surrounding area for urban areas to define the LAI. The dataset is based on MODIS using a previous iteration of the retrieval algorithm, version 5, and MODIS has 1 kilometer resolution. So 1 kilometer resolution is definitely not sufficient to cover urban areas. And in fact, the MODIS data set masks urban areas. So there's actually no LAI data that can be derived from that data set. So our objective was to replace the default leaf area index with the latest available high resolution satellite imagery, specifically targeting urban vegetation. Next slide. Before we get into the specific products that we're using, it's helpful to give an overview of how Megan calculates emissions. So emissions are given by the product of emission activity, a landscape weighted emission factor, and normalized leaf area index. Normalized leaf area index is defined as the ratio of leaf area index to green vegetation fraction. However, note that the green vegetation fraction also plays a role in determining the landscape weighted emission factors. And that's by virtue of the growth forms. So growth forms are essentially the fractional coverage of trees, shrubs, crops, and herbs in a given grid cell. And so what we do is we scale the sum of those 4 growth forms by the, we scale it to match so that the sum matches the green vegetation fraction. Next slide, please. So this slide provides an overview of the products, the remote sensing products that we're using. In terms of leaf area index, we use the Sentinel dataset, which is a high resolution 10-meter dataset that is purchased. So we determined that it was feasible to purchase 3 UTM tiles. Those 3 UTM tiles are overlaid in the insert at the right on our modeling domain. So this provides decent coverage of the South Coast Air Basin, but little beyond. So to fill in the spaces for the entire domain, we turn to MODIS, which again uses its 1 kilometer resolution. However, it uses an updated retrieval algorithm, version 6, which was post 2015. And we selected the year 2017 to match the UTM tiles that we had purchased from the Sentinel dataset. And so even though MODIS doesn't include data in urban areas, we're able to fuse these 2 data sets to fill in that urban vegetation. For green vegetation fraction, we weren't able to use the USGS-based data set that was employed in Megan. This was discontinued in 2012, so we turned to NOAA Beer's product, which is a 1 kilometer green vegetation fraction. Next slide. So here we're seeing a comparison of the normalized leaf area for our domain. And if we were looking at this figure alone, we would anticipate that emissions would increase because the leaf area index is obviously higher compared to the default input that's used in Megan. However, recall that normalized leaf area index is only one part of the equation. Next slide, please. Another part of the equation is, of course, the landscape weighted emission factors. And so that's governed by, or the changes that we made to this input is governed by the green vegetation fraction. So here I'm showing 2 figures for isoprene and alpha and beta pinene. And these are emission factor ratios expressed as the updated emission factor relative to the base. And we see significant decreases for both species, and especially in urban areas. Next slide. So when we actually run the Megan model using these updated inputs, this is showing an annual average isoprene emission for our modeling domain and at 2200 UTC, which is mid-afternoon. So we do see decreases in terms of isoprene in the South Coast Air Basin. There are areas of increase, particularly up towards the Central Valley and down south towards Calexico. Next slide, please. So while we do see domain-wide BVOC emission increases for both isoprene and terpenes, There are significant decreases observed in the basin, and especially in urban areas. As you'll note in the table below, there was a greater than factor of 2 decrease for isoprene in urban areas with the updated input. Next slide. So here I want to just briefly discuss some preliminary modeling results. We wanted to test the sensitivity towards ozone formation regarding these changes. We did observe a fairly sensitive response in the model, but again, we note that this is preliminary and further evaluation is ongoing. But we did observe ozone decreases within the basin following these changes. Next slide. So this is the final part of my talk, which is to discuss the contract with Alex Gunther's group at UC Irvine to improve the urban tree inventory. So the way this was done is they compiled municipal tree inventories for 140 cities within the basin, and then they updated the tree species composition that's used in Megan. So here are some key points that was derived from this study. 45 tree species were found to account for 80% of all trees in the basin. And compared to an earlier inventory, there's been a substantial decrease in native species. Interestingly, about half of the tree species do not emit isoprene according to the emission factors that are built into Megan 3.1. A majority of tree species lack reliable BVOC measurements on a somewhat concerning note. Next slide. So again, these two figures are very similar to the ones I presented in the previous section of my presentation. This is the ratio of the emission factors map for isoprene and alpha and beta pinene expressed as the ratio of the updated to base input. For isoprene, we do see that those emission factors are overall lower in the basin. For alpha and beta pinene, we see sort of some areas of increase and other areas of decrease. So next slide, please. So here we can see how this all shakes out. Here I'm showing the basin summer averaged emissions and daily emissions. And so we do see that isoprene decreases somewhat significantly, but terpenes are actually quite similar. Next slide, please. So again, we wanted to test the sensitivity towards ozone formation in the basin. So we turned to our trusty CMAQ model. And of course, the first thing to note here is the only differences we see are largely contained to the basin and slightly east and north of the basin. That's just due to the fact that we only modified the emission factors in the basin. So that's what we would expect to see. But we see the same direction of the change, right? So ozone is actually decreasing, and that's consistent with what we saw in the previous section with the decreases in BVOCs. So again, the model is demonstrating some sensitivity towards that, but these results are preliminary. Next slide. So we do believe that our BVOC inventory is likely artificially low following these updates that we've made. And we've identified a couple areas of improvement. The first being with the growth form distribution. So the growth form distribution that's employed in Megan by default does not really do a good job of characterizing urban areas. And this is evidenced by the few trees that we see in the basin. If we actually look at the input, it's mostly bare soil and grass. We can improve this by using high resolution satellite imagery that's able to quantify individual trees. And so we suspect that this would increase the fractional coverage of trees in the basin. The other area we're looking to improve is with the emission factors themselves. As we noted previously, the majority of tree species in the basin actually have poorly constrained emission factors. So enclosure experiments would need to be conducted, and this would be used to validate or improve the emission factors. Next slide. So in summary, we are using the latest version of Megan 3.1 for the 2022 AQMP. And we did update the leaf area index and growth form inputs using the latest available high-resolution satellite products. Preliminary CMAQ results demonstrated a high sensitivity towards these BVOC changes, but further evaluation is ongoing. Next, we, in partnership with Alex Gunther at UC Irvine, we updated the ecotypes using municipal tree inventories from 140 cities. And a majority of tree species were found not to emit isoprene or have poorly constrained emission factors in Megan. And again, we do believe that these BVOC emissions are likely artificially low, and we're looking to make some improvements in the growth forms and the emission factors to yield more accurate estimates. So this concludes my portion of the presentation.
Thank you, Eric. So any questions for biogenic emission portion? We have, yeah, Gabrielle.
Yeah, I just, sorry, my printer just ticked off. I have just one quick question. That is, I mean, you say a lot. How do you evaluate? So what type of VOC observations do you have actually available to say, make statements that, you know, the isoprene emissions might be low, or this new update is better than the previous one?
Gabrielle, so I will first take the crack of it. So that is great question, because VOC measurement wise, we do have so-called the PAMS site. However, mostly they are canister measurement, not really real time. And then those are measured like 1 every 6 days, etc. Even though those data has a long-term history, starting like 1980s and then continuing up to current days, it is still very challenging to actually compare or validate this data. And then on the second note, in terms of validation, still anthropogenic, ambient VOC concentrations dominated by anthropogenic signal, and up until these days. So it's now, separating out the biogenics through this existing PAMS measurement is very challenging. But then on the added to that is, so VOC emissions we see current days is less than half of the level we were seeing like 15 years ago or 15 years ago or so. So biogenic emission signals, or the significance is growing more. So that is generally the kind of routine regulatory measurement side. But then episodic measurement or more campaign-like measurement-wise, we are currently South Coast AQMD, and then CARB, California Resource Board, has a contract ongoing with the UC Berkeley team using aircraft measurement, airborne flux measurement that can identify, they can provide real-time measurement and then identify biogenic portions a little more clearly.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So just one quick follow-up question. How many PAMS sites do you have in your region?
So it used to be more than 10, like 15-ish, but then PAMS program has been reorganized, and then currently there are only 2 so-called super site, which is Central Los Angeles, which is a so-called a center of emission, sort of emission activity area more or less. And then the other is in the riverside. Those are more downwind side. So that change happened, I would say, a couple of years ago. So it's changing, but still the good thing is those 2 sites, it has a long history, as I mentioned, several decades of data available.
Which of course is important. And do you also take, do you also take the canister samples typically early morning? Do you always take them at a certain time of the day? Is there a protocol?
That one, yeah, that one I'm not so sure. Anybody else, maybe Scott?
Because I think the time of the day when you take the samples is of course also very, very important.
Some of them are 24-hour samples, some of them are 8-hour samples.
Yeah, and I think there's 3 hour too, but there also are some continuous instruments, but they're only operated during a shorter period of the year. I think maybe just during a few months in the summer.
Okay, thanks.
That are hourly.
Yeah, because I know that having VOC measurements to evaluate all our assumptions, our models, our emissions, it's a very challenging area. So, and you know, it's pretty much everybody struggles with that.
It's a very challenging part. Thank you.
Yes, Sang-Mi, this is Ralph again. I have a couple of questions. First, that was a nice presentation, Eric. And it's really good that you filled in the urban area LAI because it's missing in Megan 3.1 if you run it out of the box. But in slide 18, you kind of showed that compared to 2016 AQMP, the isoprene went up a factor of 10, which is concerning when I start thinking about future year control strategies. But you mentioned the Berkeley-Dalhousie NOx algorithm, which when I did the Denver SIP, the biogenic NOx went up a factor of 5, which was even more concerning. What was the change in the biogenic NOx between the 2016 AQMP Megan 2.1 and this Megan 3.1 application?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We saw something very similar. We did see about a factor of 5 increase in the slow NOx, and we did test the sensitivity of that relative to running the model without the soil NOx processor. And we found that design values did increase by of order 3 to 4 ppb across the basin, actually.
So just a little bit more building upon the Eric's response. So the biogenic emissions in urban area, especially in Southern California, has high uncertainties. As you all know, that's the East Coast or the Texas, that southeastern states have higher contribution of biogenic emissions due to the rich vegetation existing in the area. So this biogenic emission models traditionally has been developed and adjusted for the vegetations over there. For the Southern California, as we noted during the discussion, biogenic emission becomes increasingly important. The reason is the anthropogenic emissions going down substantially. And then despite of the importance, the study about the vegetations and then BVOCs, especially in urban area, are relatively uncommon. It's a relatively smaller portion. So that is why we are using the so-called state of the art, the satellite data, and then available the database to refine it. But having said that, as Gabriel questioned, how to validate this data is a big question. We are trying to introduce the best available data into it, but does that mean that is really better data? We do not know yet, but then we hope we are moving the right direction. But then eventually we need some sort of field measurement or experiment that can validate this data. And then it passed the AQMP, the data that was available, the most current data at the time of development of the AQMP was used. And then in past AQMP, it wasn't straight Megan 2.1, even though what we compared in this presentation was Megan 2.1. There was a little kind of historical or empirical basis, more sort of refinement on the general biogenic emission, and then the step level QA, QC has been introduced for the biogenic emissions. But then having said that, these biogenic emissions we have shared with many experts, including Ramber, and then that was the best available data at the time of development. So any more questions? If we don't have any further questions, we can move on to the next agenda item. This one is fun topic. So this presentation is about ozone sensitivity to meteorological factors and emission changes, and then conducted as a case study with the COVID-19 shelter-in-place period. Next slide, please. So here is a change of air quality during COVID-19 study period. The blue lines are business as usual until mid-March, which is March 15 in this case. And then California issued a shelter-in-place order starting March 19, and South Coast AQMD started teleworking as March 15. So this red lines is showing the concentration since the shelter-in-place order. And this gray and then gray shading and gray line is 5-year average of 2015-2019. And then shading showing the range of maximum minimum of 30-day average, moving average. So this changes in NOx and PM 2.5 and ozone are, I'm sure it's not the first time the advisory group members and publics are seeing this, because these changes in air quality have been presented to many occasions that South Coast AQMD hosted, including governing board and then governing board committee meetings. So I'm not going into too much details of how this changed. This is just to presenting. So this period that highlighted in red are the study period. So throughout this study period, throughout this presentation, this study period we'll just mention, refer as a COVID case, COVID period. Next slide, please. So this presentation is focusing on the modeling practice itself and then how to interpret the modeling result. So for that purposes, specifically, we modeled March 15 through May 15 of last year. We used the CMAQ warp smoke Megan platform. That is the same platform to be utilized in the current AQMP. And anthropogenic emission is a sort of a hybrid version. So the latest EPA approved available inventory is from the 2016 AQMP. But then since we as an agency developing next AQMP, we have some categories updated. For example, in the meantime, there was MFAC 2017, which is updated version from the previous MFAC 14 that was used the last AQMP. So while majority of emissions are still coming from the last AQMP, on-road mobile emissions are revised using latest EPA approved on-road mobile source emission model. Next one, please. This is just a general overview how model performs against the observation. So kind of hold on to asking model performance in this case is about the emission changes, etc. So later on in this presentation, we'll discuss more how to reflect the changes in human behavior during COVID period into emissions inventory. But in general, so pretty much majority of this ozone, the ambient ozone levels or predicted ozone levels were influenced by meteorological factors. And then in general, our modeling system does fairly reasonable job to capture the trend of ambient ozone level. Next one, please. So these are outline of this current presentation. So first, we'd like to discuss how meteorology impact ambient ozone levels. And then second one is biogenic emissions. Biogenic emission, that is also response to meteorology. So we wanted to see how biogenic emission itself affect the ambient ozone level. And then third portion is a change in anthropogenic emission. There has been huge change in human response to COVID shelter-in-place order. And then that has changed the emissions in the basin. And that changes and impact on ozone will be discussed as a last item. Next one, please. So the first part, meteorological impact. Next, please. So we evaluated meteorological impact by employing 3 different years into modeling period. Those are 2018 and 2019 and 2020 for the same period, same spring period, meaning that March 15 to May 15, 2-month period. During this 3-year, the ambient ozone level showed distinctive characteristics. And then in this graph, we presented the 2 different metrics. So one is number of days that goes above the federal standard. And then the right-hand side, the second portion of the graph showing the maximum concentration that observed during this period. And the color code as indicated in the legend on the right-hand side. So whichever metric you use, you can see that 2020 shows highest ozone concentration, and then 2019 was the lowest of the 3, and 2018 was in between. So this indicates knowing that 2020 ambient ozone was influenced by a change in human activity, still meteorology does something very distinctively different impact on ambient level. Next one, please. So in this simulation, we fixed emissions and also initial values and boundary values, but we changed meteorology only. And in that case, you don't need to see details not really visible in this slides, but just intention is the magnitude of ozone concentration you see in the modeling domain. The first one, upper left, is 2018 meteorology. Second one is 19, and the last one is 2020 meteorology. And then you can see this color scale, the 2020 shows the highest ozone. So our modeling platform mimics the ambient behavior reasonably well here. Next slide. Again, this one tends to show the differences of the 3 different meteorology. These 3 color schemes that shows using the 3 different sets of meteorology, and then the yellow definitely shows the highest levels. But then since meteorology changes day to day, the actual ups and downs changes day to day, as you can see here. But then actual performance or implication will be further discussed in later of this presentation. Next one, please. So this one, we used the matrix that's again relevant for attainment demonstration. EPA guidance requires the top 10 days of each station to be used in attainment demonstration, so-called the RRF approach. And these are 3 sets of simulation, and then we pick each set. From each set, we pick highest 10 days. 10 days with the highest ozone concentration. And then again, those are different stations within the basin, and unanimously, the green bars that using 2020 meteorology has the highest concentration. And the difference in this 8-hour concentration here is almost 10 ppb here. Next slide, please. This is top 10 days using 1-hour ozone. We called it MD1. That's the kind of notation used throughout the presentation. So maximum daily 1-hour ozone, and very similar trend. So regardless to the location, the green bar, the 2020 meteorology promote the highest ozone formation. Next slide, please. So then what we have seen in the previous part is meteorology matters. When you fix emission, but just to change meteorology, by doing so, you can have 10 ppb differences in 8 hours or almost 20 ppb differences in 1 hour. But then what about biogenic emission? Oh, sorry. Next slide, please. So when you change meteorology, biogenic emission changes as well. So when you bring higher temperature, that would promote BVOC. So you will end up higher amount of BVOC. So this is biogenic emissions that's expected in response to the 3 different sets of meteorology. And as not surprisingly, you can see 2020 has the highest amount of BVOC, And 2019, when it shows the lowest ambient level, has the lowest amount of BVOC. In this calculation, we have not changed input to Megan model other than meteorology, meaning that the parameters that discussed in the previous presentation by Eric, such as LAI or growth forms or green vegetation fractions, etc., have been fixed here. So what this means in reality, if vegetation growth changes as a response to meteorology, this difference can be even larger. Next slide, please. So this is the weeds this is demonstrating an additional sensitivity simulations we conducted. That is, we used the high ozone forming potential meteorology, meaning that that's year 2020 meteorology. And then we used lowest ozone forming potential meteorology. That's 2019 meteorology. So these yellow bars and gray bars are the same as the graphs included in the previous slides. But then in the middle, this orange is the new test. That is, we mixed meteorology with, but we used the highest ozone forming meteorology. However, we used the lowest the amount of BVOC that was produced as a response to 2019 meteorology. So when you fixed BVOC, the still meteorology itself, meteorology meaning the temperature, PBL height, wind, and etc., that still promotes quite a bit of ozone. As you can see, Glendora, it's 88.9, almost more than 6-7 ppb is driven by the meteorological factor itself. However, there is another couple of ppb that's driven by BVOC. So the highest concentration we have seen in 2020 has been driven as a combination of meteorology and its response to BVOC. Next slide, please. So the next part is the changes in anthropogenic emission. We started this presentation with the meteorology first, but then now let's move on to changes in the human activities. Next slide, please. So we used various sources of data to estimate the changes in the human-driven emissions. On-road mover category has the most significant changes because people did not drive every day as they used to, and then since people do not drive to commute, the differences between the working days versus none has been pretty much disappeared. But then there are various sources of data that can support to quantify the changes. For example, those Caltrans performance measurement system, PAMS data, and then other thing is way in motion, that's still Caltrans data, and other source of data such as street light, geotab, those were considered. Off-road wise, some categories a little more transparent to develop the adjustment factor, such as aircraft. In such case, we used FAA's operations network data to estimate the reduction of operation, and ocean-going vessel data that is in principle AIS-based data, but then we used ISH CWEB data, and then using internal STEP expertise on interpreting the data. Reclaim data, we use continuous emission monitoring system, and then that even shows the changes in level of emissions, and we use that to adjust the emissions from major point source categories. Next one, please. And then this slide is the one that we borrowed from the presentation given at our governing board meeting in June 5th. And then this is rough estimate at the time with the data available. So It's saying that the port activity has been reduced by 11%, and then flight has been reduced by 61%, and majority of vehicle activity has been reduced almost 25 to 50% level. Next slide. This is a spatial map of emissions on left side, NOx, and right side, VOC, but this is a business as usual case. So this supposedly represent 2020 emission. Again, that one was developed during the last AQMP with a little bit of adjustment with the MFAC 17. But then as you can see in the NOx map in the left, you can see so-called ocean-going vessel shipping channels and the majority of the urbanized area and the tracks of the freeways and then train tracks. And then VOC on the right, it also shows a populated area and then some freeway signals. Next one, please. And this is changes that estimated to reflect the COVID situation. So what you see in the left-hand side, majority of the blue colors mean is reduction. So we expect quite a bit of reduction throughout the basin. We also expect reductions through the major roadways and then reductions even in ocean-going vessel activities. Right-hand side, VOC emissions, you can see there are the reductions signifies some populated areas, but there are also a little bit of increase in the highly populated area that reflects a sort of increased use of a certain consumer product categories, such as personal use of disinfectants, etc. The little bit of red dots and in front of the ports area reflect sort of increased number of tanker vessels anchored in front of a port area for extended period during this COVID situation. So once a COVID case developed, COVID shelter in place order case developed, the personal use of vehicles decreased substantially. That led to the reduction in gasoline consumption. So there were many tens or 20s tanker ships that were anchored in front of the port area. And we have in-house the analysis to kind of estimate the VOC emissions from such tanker ships, and then which is not a new topic to the agency, since we had the so-called coastal order episode that our compliance division and the laboratory division has been investigated extensively in past couple of years. Next slide. So this is just modeling domain ready emissions. So do not compare this with our SIP inventory. This is just to illustrate the magnitude of reductions expected during COVID case scenario. So NOx wise, we include approximately 73 ton reduction, and then VOC is fairly similar, 18 ton reduction, but not as much reduction as NOx was. Next one, please. So with adjusted emission, we ran the CMAQ, and then these are again top 10 days with MDAS. And the red one is business as usual, and the blue one is COVID case, meaning that substantially less NOx emission and then VOC emissions. The difference is fairly smaller than what you saw in the previous section. So its difference is about 1 to 2 ppb lower in inland downwind sites, but then also you can see like Central LA, Los Angeles, North Main Street, the COVID case even shows a higher ozone number. We will discuss furthermore this so-called NOx disbenefit, meaning that on the course of meaning that when you have less NOx emission, that could lead to higher ozone temporarily, meaning that little bit of NOx emission could lead to higher ozone depending on where you are in chemical regime. So we can further discuss that interpretation in the next section. So next slide. Let's say it's very similar result for 1 hour or daily max 1 hour ozone. Again, very similar result, couple of ppb lower in far downwind, such as San Bernardino or Riverside, but then Los Angeles Main Street, it's a few ppb higher. Next one, please. So spatial variability. So this is easier to see. This NOx, the ozone response to NOx decrease, you can almost predict where it happens. So red color means that with COVID emission, we experience the higher ozone. And the blue color means you reduce NOx emission as a response to COVID case, and then you get less ozone. So this red side is mostly in the western side. That is that well-known NOx disbenefit, meaning that a little bit of NOx reduction could increase the ozone. But if you go further downwind, as marked by these blue colors in the inland area, you do reduce ambient ozone level. Next slide. So to further clarify, we split out NOx and VOC separately. So since we changed both the NOx, this one is separating them out. Left side, if you reduce only NOx, yes, you expect a higher ozone, primarily in the LA County area, but then even the upland and Fontana area, you can still expect a slight increase. But if you reduce VOC, as shown in the right-hand side, you do reduce ozone. However, this is that you do reduce ozone. Next one, please. So this is the time that we need to revisit this ozone chemistry a little bit, because this message can be very confusing, but I'm sure all the advisory group members, these are kind of well-known topics, but we'd like to revisit and re-summarize what we observed during this experiment. Next one, please. So there is a so-called weekend effect. It's well known. So during weekend, typically NOx emission goes down because there is less heavy-duty truck driving, which are heavy-duty trucks are major NOx emitter. So during weekend, majority of heavy-duty trucks do not operate. So that leads to the lower NOx emission. However, when you have lower NOx during weekend, you experience a higher ozone. So that is a so-called weekend effect. This is a case of central Los Angeles, in other words, Los Angeles Main Street. Left-hand side is NOx ratio. So ambient NOx level, the monitored NOx level, weekend NOx divided by weekday NOx. So this value is less than 1, meaning that during weekend, NOx level is lower. On the right-hand side, we present the ozone ratio. So ozone weekend divided by ozone weekend divided by ozone weekday. So this ratio is higher than 1, meaning that during weekend, ozone level is higher. But what we'd like to emphasize here is the change over time. We plotted in the past 20 years. Again, 2020 data is preliminary, but you can see the level of weekend effect is diminishing. As you can see on this right-hand side graph, the slope is negative, so it is coming down. So while there's still weekend effect, it is diminishing, the impact getting smaller. Next slide, please. When you do the same analysis in inland receptor area, this is the example of San Bernardino monitoring station. As you see, the NOx levels in weekend is still less than 1, and then that the ratio has not changed over time. That has not changed significantly. But what you see on the right side, ozone levels, and 2020, those are but okay, let me not go to 2020, but still this slope is getting closer to 1. compared to 2020, that was almost 40% higher compared to year 2000, which shows ozone can be even 40% higher than weekdays. Now it is barely 10% or not even 10%. Next one, please. There is a seasonality in so-called weekend effect or NOx disbenefit. So we plotted this same graph for March through May period. Those are the COVID sensitivity case period. And the right-hand side is June through September. That is full ripened ozone season. It's the same data, same station. Only the difference is the months included in the analysis. And then you can see during summertime, now the weekend effect is almost disappeared. So even we do not consider year 2020 due to the privations of emission, 2019 and 2018 data showing it's almost one, right on it. So there is not much weekend versus weekday differences. Next slide, please. So what does that mean? Why in some cases we see this benefit, NOx disbenefit, why some cases we do not see this benefit? This is ozone isoplat. Still it was developed during last AQMP. And next click, please. And then this blue dots appears right here, representing approximately 2020 emission situation. So the VOC emission approximately 390 ton, and the NOx emission approximately 300 ton. And those are business as usual case. And next click, please. What we estimated is we reduced NOx substantially, but then VOC was more or less the same level. In that case, we moved from this blue dot to yellow dot. That yellow dot is more or less representing COVID shelter-in-place order period, emissions during the COVID period. So even though there is a substantial amount of NOx reduction, as you can see, if you moved straight downward, there is no benefit in ambient ozone level. It is almost the same level or very marginal benefit you could expect. Therefore, the emission change itself did not bring any improvement in ambient ozone level. Quite opposite, as discussed in meteorological impact, meteorology was adverse, and then it was promoting ambient ozone formation, which brought a lot higher ozone concentration. Next slide, please. So this is the summary of our in-house analysis. So a set of sensitivity tests was performed to understand chemistry and dynamics of ozone episode during the shelter-in-place order period. And then numerical modeling was conducted, and then we found meteorology brings much larger impact on ambient ozone than changes in anthropogenic emissions. And then majority of LA County stations still in VOC limited regime, while downwind inland receptor areas are transitioning to NOx limited regime quickly. So that is the weekend effect. So weekend effect is still strong during springtime, but during summertime, it is diminishing quickly. So this concludes our COVID study case presentation. So if there is any question, we'll be happy to take and provide answer to it.
Yes, I'm off again. I noticed in that the NOx came down about 20%, which agrees well with the NO2 satellite data, so that's good. And your VOC came down 5%, but in your isopleth, it looks like the VOC increased slightly.
The VOC, the isoplat, the dots maybe have been moved while we are changing copy and pasting, but then the story is 5% very small change. And then if even you move dots a little bit left, still you would not see too much differences. Maybe you could see maybe 1 ppb changes because those are downwind side. But still what we see is if we separate our meteorological impact with the emission changes, majority of impact was driven by meteorology. But yeah.
And my second question is, it's difficult to compare the May 2019 and May 2020 ozone because May 2019 was very wet and cold and rainy, while May 20 was one of the hottest Mays on record and hot and dry. So you can't really compare ozone between those two periods.
Thanks for the comment, Ralph. So as you observed it very correctly. So 2019 was wet and cold. That was why ozone was low. And then we wanted to see how that type of meteorology impact the ambient level. And then 2018 was in between of the two because it wasn't as obviously as wet or cold as 2019, but still even when you compare 2018 meteorology to 2020, still you could see quite a bit of impact.
Thank you.
The next one, the Gabrielle.
Sorry, yes, I have again a question.
That's okay. That's the whole idea of this the meeting.
Seems like you have done a lot of work. I was just wondering, when you looked at the emissions and specifically the activity data, have you also noticed that there is maybe a slightly different diurnal cycle in your emissions, and that maybe there is now that the changes in the total emission magnitude affected weekdays in a different way than maybe weekends? Because I'm asking, I have done, a very first quick preliminary analysis of traffic counts at some of the stations in Colorado. And you can notice that, there is on the weekends, the changes to the diurnal cycle were somewhat different than the changes to the diurnal cycle on weekdays. And specifically, there seemed to be something like the evening rush hour was much more flattened out and traffic stopped earlier in the evening. So there were changes not only in the magnitude overall, but also over the course of a day. And I wonder to what degree these might have impacted also air quality.
Gabriel, thank you. Thank you for your comments. That was really good observation. So for this specific simulation case we presented today was using so-called standard weekday weekend variation. So even though the standard variation, so the vehicle category that exhibit the most distinctive day of week pattern is a light duty passenger and also heavy duty, because heavy duty disappears during weekends. So for this specific simulations we presented today, we used more or less a default pattern. So even though there is, let's say, 50% reduction in light duty emissions, that was a total reduction, but then there is a room to improve this day-to-day distribution. But having said that, I also would like to introduce that our effort that we have developed in the past 5 years, even used in the past AQMP, is we utilize traffic count data from Caltrans, which is performance evaluation monitoring system, the PEMS data. That is the data more or less used in Google Traffic Map. That is actual real-time data showing traffic flow at the major freeways. And then we utilize those data to actually allocate hour to hour or day to day or location by location traffic changes. So when we had extensive study to employ that data for our modeling, and so that's one of the improvement we introduced the last AQMP. When it comes to heavy duty, the data is a little bit more scarce, so there is a little more difficulties to do it. But then there is more room to improve heavy duty data. But then light and medium passenger vehicles are well represented by this PAMS monitoring data. So next step for this COVID modeling is we retrieve 2020 PAMS data and then we distribute on-road mobile emissions. That is good, the next step.
Sounds great, yeah, because I think it would be just a really interesting analysis to do, to what degree, not just the magnitude, but also the shift in the diurnal distribution of the emissions impacted air quality. So sounds interesting. Thank you.
That's we couldn't agree more. Any more questions? Here is, if there is Pablo.
Yes, a very nice presentation. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on, how this impacts how we meet the standards. I mean, we had huge reductions on some of these precursors, and just because we had a bad, year in terms of meteorology, ozone concentrations were even higher, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Thoughts on, Pablo, would you mind to just readdress your question once more? So I just don't want to mumble, want to get to the point.
Yeah, what are your thoughts? And, we're trying to maybe reduce precursor emissions to achieve standards, right? And here we have a case where, there were large reductions, but because of meteorological reasons, also concentration seems to have gone up significantly.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's actually really the food for thoughts as well. But then, Paul, can you please put the slide 61, that the blue and red, yellow, red graph? Yes. So Pablo, the question is more like, how do we interpret these findings from COVID study and then apply to the future attainment strategy? So our goal, actually the goal of this current AQMP is to demonstrate the path to attain 70 ppb ozone standard. To do so, we develop this ozone isoplot or AQMA plot. So what we're seeing is here, the blue dot is more or less 2020 situation. And then we need to get down to 70 ppb. That is somewhere in the blue. And then to do so, the fastest path is just a straight drop down to the 70 ppb from the blue point, more or less from the blue point. Or the other path is, you can do the same thing with the VOC. So from the blue path, you might just cross the X horizontally, and then you could reach 70 ppb. But then there are stations when you choose this, the horizontal path. In other words, you are controlling VOC, not NOx, you cannot reach the 70 ppb level. So what our strategy is, the NOx strategy, meaning that we currently still experiencing NOx disbenefit, meaning that this 70 ppb, 70 tons of NOx reduction due to COVID, but still that did not improve much of ozone. But if you go further down substantially, then you can eventually reach to 70 ppb, the goal level. It is very challenging goal, but let me give you another example. Currently, the level of NOx emission to entire basin is 300, not even 350 ton. This used to be more than 1,000 ton, like 20 years ago. We have been improved so much, and then we're going down this the path to reach the 70 ppb, and that's one of the path that are under consideration. Is very likely that would be the case would be the case of the strategy to attain the 70 ppb. Why this sounds very daunting? This diminishing weekend effect is another example that we are going over this so-called hump. So it's this so-called disbenefit area. once we go over this benefit area, reduce the NOx would give you reduced ozone.
Thank you. That's comforting.
Thank you. We have a question from the Peter Okrowski. Can you talk?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, I just have a question about slide 61, the one you have on the screen, and also slide 2. So when I look at slide 2.
1 second, Peter, 1 second, please.
Sure.
So Peter, would you mind to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Peter Okarowski. I'm a consultant and I do a lot of work for the railroads. And I'm not a modeler, which always makes me a little nervous in talking with this group, but everybody seems so nice. I thought I'd ask my question here. So when I look at slide 2, it looks like the 2020 ozone design value is up around 130 for the 8-hour number.
Are you referring the very first slide?
The very first slide. It looks like we're up around 130.
Slide number 2, please.
And
Saying you want to go all the way back there, it'll take a while.
Okay, so but then when I look at this slide, slide 61, it doesn't look like 130 is even shown in the ozone design value colors on the right. In fact, it looks like its maximum is around 103, 104. And then when I see the blue dot get placed, it looks like it would be somewhere around, I don't know, I'm just judging by the colors, between 90 and 95. And I'm just wondering why that blue dot isn't in a color that would be close to 130.
So that was.
I understand it's, but are the colors right in this isopleth?
Yes, that was really careful reading of the slides. We appreciate that type of attention. So the model prediction is never 100% on the measurement value.
Okay.
So having said that, the reason is the numerical model has biases. It's something coming from numerically, something coming from even maybe limitation of understanding, or something is still being under improvement. So there are many levels of uncertainties, and then in a way, it's not a perfect word. However, model is the tool that allows us to, for example, tease out the meteorological impact from emission, tease out the biogenic impact from the anthropogenic emission, etc. So we have to rely on the numerical model. And then also future concentration, you don't know yet because it does not happen, but that's why we have to use a numerical model to kind of predict it. But then as you observe, since a model prediction is not perfect, so EPA recommends to use a so-called relative response factor. What that means is you don't take model prediction as it is, but you take relative change of the model for a given emission scenario. So that is one way to minimize the biases exist in the numerical model. And so that is kind of overview why we do not see model prediction exactly the same as measurement. But then for this isopleth in the slide 61, this one was developed in during the 2016 AQMP. It used a different metrology. That was 2012 metrology. And then it was using different measurement value. It was relied on 2012 measurement value. That's the design value discussion we presented as the first presentation. So when we update this using the new inventory and the new design value and new metrology, that you will see will be closer to what you expect.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So next question, Tim Polly, please, can you speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you. And I apologize in advance if this is not a cogent question because I'm trying to read the Isoprene graph and understand it. Could you put the graph up with the yellow and the blue dot on?
The
one that shows the.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So that yellow dot is the COVID dot, right? And the other one is the business as usual dot or something like that.
Tim, could you, some of know you during your participation in other working group meeting, but still, would you mind introduce yourself?
Sure. I work for Airlines for America and have been involved in issues in the South Coast for a while. And like the person who preceded me, I am trying to understand the technical details behind all this so that I can understand kind of the direction that the district is proposing to go in more detail. So I'm trying to understand this graph, and what I was interested in was your statement that the NOx strategy is the shortest path here. And that to me looks like that path means going from 300 to roughly 100 tons per day straight down, which is more than a 2/3 reduction in NOx. But it also seems to me that you get to a similar kind of area if you reduce VOCs by roughly that percentage. So I'm wondering about whether there's been any cost benefit analysis in terms of looking at, well, if you take a NOx only strategy, this is the cost. If you take a VOC strategy, this is the cost. If you take a mixed strategy, these are the overall costs. Particularly when we look at this graph and coming from an industry in which the COVID crisis is absolutely, devastated it. What one of your slides showed 61% reduction, which is quite accurate in activities with aircraft, and we barely get a blip here. So it strikes me that this kind of illustrates that even a massive economic crisis barely moves the needle, and need to understand, well, what are the relative costs and benefits of looking at NOx versus VOC. And so that's my observation. I think I'm reading this graph correctly, but I may not be. So please, I'd just be interested in your
Tim, thanks for your thanks for your question. So you read the graph very correctly. Yes, you could just draw a line just horizontally, or you could draw a line vertically. So, but then this ozone chemistry changes from station to station. This example is Glendora. But because there was other reasons we chose this, because we also wanted to explain 1 hour ozone, but then we thought there was not enough time, so we did not discuss, we didn't go to that part. But then the design site are more further inland, San Bernardino or Fontana crystalline area. And different location, depending on the location in the basin, the chemistry changes, transport pattern changes, so the shape of this plot changes.
I see.
And then some stations, and then for the attainment demonstration, we have to show attainment for all the stations within the basin. And then for some stations, if you take VOC path, meaning that the straight line to the left, you cannot reach to 70 ppb. So up until last AQMP, our conclusion was a NOx strategy is the only strategy to reach to such low level that defined in federal standard.
Okay, that's very helpful. And so another question I would have is, are you going to provide a kind of a more formal paper on this that will provide all the details behind it? And also, I didn't quite track it. I see the Glen at the top there, and so having understanding where all the graphs look like and kind of what the potential trades are would be helpful. So I'm just wondering if all of that is going to be available, including how the COVID crisis has affected things in those at every station.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. The publication is always the best way to communicate with the scientific community. We should do our diligence on that. But having said that, this year is AQMP year. We'd like to make scientific paper, but we will see how the STEP resources go. Always when there is a clear deadline to submit certain documents to EPA or hosting certain working groups, that always proceed in the priority list. But yeah, we will definitely consider, and we'd love to.
So I wasn't necessarily saying a scientific paper so much as a paper that more kind of walked folks like me through all of the steps here, and also at least made the data available so you could see like these two dots for San Bernardino, for instance, and understand it, how it affects that particular location and other locations around the district.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, so we will see what form of the documentation we'll make out of this. But just for your information, these are on webcast. So this recorded, the videos are available, will be archived on our webcast site. You can search it on the YouTube as well. So, but write-up wise, we will see what form we will do. But this COVID study has been done by many other researchers and institute. California Resource Board have done great study as well. They presented in American Geophysical Union meeting in last December. And then also JPL have done it. I'm sure Gabriel and NCAR are doing something similar as well. So we will see what form of write-up or documentation we will do, but then it's a good comment. We'll follow up with it.
Great, thanks so much.
Yes, if I can add, yeah, hi, Tim. And Sangmi, maybe we can also confirm that the isoplates for the other stations are in our last AQMP, right? So that information is available if anybody wants to access those. So you can see how the isoplates for the other stations look like, which sort of validates, not sort of, it validates what Sangmi was saying, that you need to show attainment in all stations. And if you want to do that, then the NOx control path seems to be the only one for all stations.
Sure, that's helpful. Again, to have these two dots, the BAU and the COVID dots for those isoplates, I think would be helpful as well. So anyway, thank you so much. I appreciate the response.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay. So then let's move on the last presentation of the day. We have the kind of introduction of this NEAT tool, Net Emissions Analysis tool. We had extensive working group meetings to develop this tool, but then this presentation is a sort of a quick overview of the tool's availability by Dr. Mark Carreras-Sospedra.
Hi, thanks, Simi. So yeah, I'm just gonna walk you through just a brief summary of the tool and what we've been doing with it. And so if you, Paul, can you click to the next slide? So for those of you who don't know the tool, we developed this tool called Net Emissions Analysis Tool, or we call it NEAT. And this is an analytical tool that will help policymakers determine the most effective strategies for NOx and GHG emission reductions from the residential sector. And so in a nutshell, this tool calculates changes in emissions and utility cost associated with the changing existing appliances. So we're talking about changing water heaters, space heaters, kitchen appliances, laundry, and other appliances. Next slide, please. So we started developing this tool a while back. So we had the first working group meeting in August in 2017. And since then, we had 6 other working group meetings through January 2019. And we received many comment letters from many of the working group members. And they are, most of them posted, we plan to post additional letters we received recently to the aqmd.gov/need page, where you can see the tool description, and it has information on the working group meetings, has the presentations and the comment letters as well. So we released the tool for beta testing among the working group members in last year, around January in 2019, and we received some feedback from the people testing it. And so we've been able to implement some of the changes. We are still implementing a few small changes, and hopefully we can release the tool soon. Next slide. So this is a graphical view of the tool. So this is how actually the tool looks when you start running it. And so we tried to design this tool very graphically, so hopefully it's very user-friendly. And basically by exploring the tool visually, I'll learn what each of the inputs represents. So I cannot show you here this, but you can, if you hover the mouse around every of the single entries, that data entries, you could see some information on what that means. And there are also embedded menus and information that you can see. So this is the input page. So just a few things that I just wanted to mention here. Paul, can you click once? So there you go. So this tool, we are modeling the housing stock in the South Coast Urban, and we have the information with respect to the appliances that we obtained from the Residential Appliance Saturation Survey conducted in 2009. That's a very detailed energy use survey that allows us to have detailed information on how much each appliance consume. And then we have information on the house categories or housing type. And then also we can select by climate zone that the air basin. We also, so we have some default values, but the nice thing of this tool is that it allows the user to add any new technology that someone may want to analyze for let's say, what if we have these miraculous appliances that have a super high efficiency, no emissions, and so we want to see what's the effect of that. So we could introduce the parameters for that technology and evaluate that technology. So again, so the bottom line is that we make these tools so that the users can input their own values. The next slide. Then also there are some other parameters that we need to account for when we're looking at the emissions from appliances and the changes in appliances. So if you click one more time, Paul. So there are several parameters that we can select, and but again, the bottom line is that the tool allows for flexibility, and so there are parameters that we can select for the losses in methane leaks from the natural gas transmission, whether we are some residential natural gas production, or also we can pick the emission factors for vehicle emissions, and also we can have the transmission losses from the electricity transmission that can be modified by the user if they want to analyze different factors. Also, the tool allows for analyzing the effect of implementing rooftop solar, so that can affect how much electricity you're taking from the grid, and that can affect your not only your emissions, but also the cost in your utility bill. So all these the users can use in the tool. Okay, next slide. So now, once we enter the inputs, we can run the case in which we select one appliance. We switch one appliance with a new one. So one option would be maybe a natural gas water heater with maybe a more efficient natural gas water heater or an electric heater. So then we would come to the output results page. So this is one example of what type of visual outputs the tool generates. And this is the kind of one of the main visual output that the tool has. So you can see these squares. There are two squares. And so this tells you what is the cost in terms of changes in NOx emissions, or the cost in change due to or as a result of changing the appliances, and the changes in CO2 emissions. So the square on the left shows the changes in emissions and the changes in cost. So the cost is on the x-axis, the changes in emissions are in the y-axis. So always, ideally, we would always want to have a change in technology that would lead us to the green square, because that gives us a reduced cost, so savings, and a reduction in emissions. Right. So I forget what particular case we analyze here, but in this case, we show that most of the cases, you see these little dots in the green square that shows that, okay, that change in appliance led to a reduction in emissions and a reduction in cost. And the same for CO2, so we can see that we can see how the changes in appliance could lead to maybe a reduction in emissions, or maybe we can select, we may select some technologies that might lead you to an increase cost with a reduction in emissions, or maybe we pick one technology that may end up giving you an increase in emissions, so that would take you to the red zone. So for us as a air pollution control agency, we would not favor that. But again, so the bottom line is that the tool allows for a very visual output of showing the outputs visually. So if this is just a very brief, and of course I would love to go through a demonstration, but if anyone is interested, then again, just you can go back to the website of the NEAT tool, and we have many presentations of the working group meetings that can help you understand the tool. Okay, next slide. So as I said, this tool was sent to the working group members in 2019 and the beginning of 2020. So and it was released for beta testing for a limited number of people. And so we received many of the comments from the stakeholders. Some of them implied little minor bug fixes that have been incorporated in a recent update. And then there were some major comments that were related to the vintage of the underlying data. Okay, so one of the aspects that I mentioned is that the appliance data was based on the RAS 2009 study, and there is the most recently studied is RAS 2019. The data is still being processed and reviewed, so the data is still not out available, but as soon as it becomes available, then we'd have plans to implement this new update into the tool. There are other issues with the emissions from vehicles that were assumed that used older versions of MFAC and GREET to calculate the full life cycle emissions from vehicles. And we are in the process of updating those as well. The one thing that again, just going back to the flexibility of the tool is that the user can always input the most up-to-date data available. And in the case of the district, for instance, using the need for establishing some policies or incentive programs, we would have to update data with the most updated values also. But again, so the tool allows you to input the newest available data for you to run cases. We recently also finalized a contract with UC Irvine Group that developed a module that we need to include into the NEAT tool that would more dynamically model the grid emissions and the integration of high penetration of renewables in the future. So, but this module is going to be incorporated in a future version. And as I said, so that we have the data, that the underlying data for appliance is based on the RAS 2009, and then the 2019 RAS study is still under review, and whenever the data is available, then we will review it and incorporate it to the tool. And I think that's it. I think that's the end of the presentation. So again, yeah.
So this is a little different type of modeling, but then still we can focus on different scale and different type of modeling as well. So I see any questions from advisory group members? Okay, then we move on to the Lakshmi. Lakshmi, you are allowed to talk, so please introduce yourself and then address your question, please.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment. I'm Lakshmi Jairam from Rambol US Consulting. My team has performed extensive beta testing on the NEAT tool since you released it in January 2020. And we identified some technical and model performance issues, which we've been discussing with staff over the last 6 weeks. We really appreciate staff taking the time to talk to us and in response to our comments, implement bug fixes and review the input data. We also appreciate receiving the written responses to our December 4th comment letter, which we received yesterday. And I look forward to seeing your written responses to some of the technical comments we submitted earlier this month. I would encourage staff to review the default input data updated with the current, to accurately represent the current conditions before you perform any modeling for the 2020 AQMP. And I'd particularly like to draw your attention to the cost data for appliance purchase and installation, including that for the any electrical panel upgrades that may be needed for installing electrical appliances, as this can have a significant impact on cost effectiveness analysis and any incentive fund pools that you may propose for implementing control measures under the 2020 AQMP. I also recommend that you present these inputs and outputs in upcoming STMPR or the residential and commercial building working group meetings prior to presenting any results to the AQMP advisory group. This will ensure a robust discussion of the methodology and inputs with a group of diverse and qualified technical experts and assist in a development of a concurrence on the impacts of the proposed control measures. I look forward to continue working with staff during the AQMP process, and thank you for letting me make this comment.
So I will go first, and I'm sure other experts in-house might want to make further comments. So Lakshmi, yeah, thank you for your comments. And then, yes, we sent a step response. And then as we discussed previously, all your comments and step response will be posted online because we'd like to keep transparent process of developing this tool. We believe we sent you the methane, the calculation data as well. If it's not, it's on the pipeline.
Yes, I have received that too. So we'll be looking at that. If we have any questions, we'll get back to you.
And the second item, you're talking about the updating input data to the NEAT tool. So again, we'd like to, so this tool was developed 4 years ago. With the staff started working on the development of this tool in 2016, and 2017 August was the very first working group meeting. So input data, all the appliance cost, and then even utility rate data, and an available technology, all of them were discussed in an open venue with the working group members, and all the comments we posted online, and then we kept a very transparent process. So model like any other the numerical tool, update is needed. And then as time goes, if the input data substantially changes, it requires update. And then one of the most important data, the RES 2019 data, is not available yet. Once data become available, we will review the data and then compare whether there is any significant shift from the earlier version of the data. And then the next item is discussing IO input and output at the venue of STMPR and then residential and commercial working group meeting prior to AQMP advisory group. So do you mean that we discuss the same content at both STMPR and then residential commercial working group, or you meant either?
Either one of those.
I think for that part, our executive and our deputy executive officer, Philip Fine, at the time made it very clear that it will be discussed at STMPR venue before we make any the implication or not implications before we utilize the tool to the control strategy development or rule development. So we will keep that direction.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, of course, you know, again, as Sang-Mi and Mark mentioned, this is a tool that could be used for evaluating different strategies. It's a tool that has been developed, you know, an extensive amount of time has been spent in developing it, and Scott and Mark and others can attest to that. But it's something that constantly can be updated. But in terms of using it for developing strategies, when and if we do it, obviously we will specify the parameters that were used in the model, if defaults were used, if updated information was deemed to be more appropriate was used. So nothing is going to be done in a vacuum. Everything is going to be transparent as far as our use of the model and the parameters that are used in the model to come up for evaluation of strategies. So I think that can be, you know, we don't have to be concerned about that part.
Okay, thank you.
So, the Scott or Mark, any comments that I missed, or would you like to add more?
I think that covered it on my end.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, then anybody has any question or comment for all the items discussed today? So next meeting would be in roughly in 2-3 time period, but next meeting would be heavily buried on emissions inventory side to be used in the next AQMP. So once we have the dates on the horizon or the contents to discuss, we will reach out to advisory group members and also the interested party to schedule next meeting. So with that, I think that concluded today's meeting. Zuri, would you like to add anything as a closing remark?
No, thank you so much for everyone's participation. Thank you, staff, for all the hard work in putting the presentations together. Yeah, great job. And thanks again for advisory members' comments and questions and public comments.
Okay, thank you, everybody. That concludes today's meeting.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Really
Thanks,
great.
Amy.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.